My son, Dustin, sneered at my ex-wife's funeral, calling me a failure who'd get nothing from her $35 million will, his cruel words echoing before 200 mourners. His betrayal, accusing me of dragging Brianna down, burned with injustice. Greed fueled his lies, but the lawyer's sly chuckle hinted at a shocking twist. You won't believe what he revealed next. Stay tuned for a family betrayal story that flips everything as I fight for justice and reclaim my dignity. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. As I drove back from the chapel, the sting of Dustin's words clung to me like smoke from a bad fire. I pulled into my parking spot at the apartment complex, the engine of my old Honda ticking as it cooled. Inside, the place felt smaller than ever, just a one-bedroom rental I'd called home since the divorce, with its linoleum floors scarred from years of wear and that persistent coffee stain from the morning the call came. I sank into the worn armchair in the living room, the one Brianna and I had bought secondhand when we first married, its fabric faded from sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. The afternoon light slanted in, casting long shadows across the room, and I closed my eyes, letting the memories flood back. How had it come to this? My own son, humiliating me in front of 200 people, treating me like a stranger who'd ruined his mother's life. But the betrayal didn't start today. It had roots in years of sacrifices I'd made for them, sacrifices that now felt like fool's gold. I remembered scraping together $50,000 for Dustin's college tuition at the University of Wyoming, working overtime at the power plant to cover it when Brianna's business was just getting off the ground. It's an investment in his future, she'd said, and I agreed, even though it meant delaying my own retirement dreams. Then there was the $20,000 I spent on his first car, a reliable Chevy truck, so he could drive to internships without worry. And the wedding. Good Lord, that extravagant reception at the country club cost us $30,000 with prime rib dinners and a band playing all night, all because Brianna wanted it perfect for our boy. Those weren't just numbers. They were nights I came home bone-tired, hands calloused from keeping the grid running for the whole town, only to see Dustin grow more distant, echoing his mother's ambition. The real heart of the betrayal was tied to the assets Brianna had built, the consulting firm now worth $35 million with its offices in Denver and real estate holdings scattered across Wyoming. The family home on Hillcrest Avenue, appraised at $800,000 last I heard, with its wraparound porch where we'd watched sunsets and the big backyard where Dustin learned to ride his bike. I'd contributed the down payment of $100,000 from my savings back in the 90s, picturing it as our forever home. But as Brianna's success grew, so did the divide. Our relationship fractured like old china. Dustin, once my little buddy who drew pictures on the kitchen table with crayons, leaving scars in the wood that I can still feel under my fingers, started rolling his eyes at my simple life. Dad doesn't understand, he'd say, preferring Brianna's world of hedge funds and client dinners. The photos on my wall captured it. Brianna in her red wool coat on our first date, sharp and determined. Dustin as a toddler, grinning in my arms at the hospital. But those bonds eroded, replaced by contempt for my steady job at the power plant, as if keeping lights on for thousands wasn't worth anything compared to her empire. The shock from the chapel lingered, a dull ache in my chest, but as I sat there, it began to shift. At first I was just hurt, replaying Dustin's accusations, feeling like the villain in my own story. How could he twist our history so cruelly, ignoring the father who'd been there for every school play and scraped knee? But then anger flickered, turning to realization. Dustin's betrayal wasn't new. It was the culmination of years where he'd chosen Brianna's path, dismissing my values as mediocrity. How could my own son turn on me like this after all I've done? I whispered to myself, the words hanging in the air like dust motes. I wasn't the failure. I had integrity, the kind that built families, not fortunes. And Brianna, maybe she'd seen that too, naming me in her will. In that moment, I recognized my power, the truth of my sacrifices, the quiet strength she'd once loved. It was time to stop being the victim. I had a chance to confront this, to show Dustin that family wasn't about money. The pain cut deep, a mix of grief and fury that made my hands tremble. It felt like a knife in my back, I thought, recalling Dustin's sneer as he labeled me a drag on Brianna's success. The details sharpened the wound, the $60,000 I'd loaned for his business school, unpaid and forgotten, the family vacations canceled for her meetings, leaving me to console a disappointed boy with stories of fishing trips we'd never take. Brianna's priority on work over us, checking emails at midnight in our granite kitchen, while I handled the laundry and groceries. "Dad doesn't understand," Dustin would echo, his voice full of exasperation, as if my contentment with an honest day's work was a crime. The hurt was raw, a coil of emotion that left me breathless, but it fueled a fire. I deserved better than this dismissal. As the light faded, I glanced at Brianna's old photo on the mantel, her smile frozen in time. "You promised forever, but look what our son has become," I murmured, my voice cracking with emotion. The decision came then. I'd attend the will reading not as a broken man, but ready to face whatever came. Rummaging through a drawer, I found old bank statements proving my contributions, the $25,000 loan for Dustin's first apartment, receipts from the power plant over time. This was my leverage, a small step toward reclaiming my dignity. Whatever Brianna had left, it might be the key to turning this around. The kitchen, with its humming refrigerator, dispensing ice just like in our old home, wrapped me in memories. The afternoon sun had dipped, leaving the room in soft twilight, shadows playing on the walls adorned with family photos, Dustin's high school graduation, Brianna's business award ceremony, where I'd stood proudly in the background. The scarred wooden spoon on the counter, used for countless family meals, reminded me of simpler times before ambition fractured us. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the window, echoing snowy nights when love felt unbreakable. This space, humble and filled with ghosts, amplified the loss, but it also grounded me in what I'd given and what they'd taken for granted. The betrayal hurt, but here, amid these reminders, I felt the stirrings of resolve. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The morning after the funeral, I woke up with a fire in my chest, the kind that burns away doubt and leaves only resolve. My small apartment in Rock Springs, Wyoming, felt colder than usual, the linoleum floor creaking under my work boots as I paced, the weight of Dustin's betrayal still heavy. His words at the chapel, calling me a failure who'd get nothing from Brianna's $35 million will, echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh cut. I'd spent the night sifting through old memories, receipts, and bank statements, $50,000 for his college tuition, $60,000 for his MBA, $100,000 for the down payment on the Hillcrest Avenue house, a 3-story Victorian with oak-lined driveway and mountain views. Those numbers weren't just money. They were years of my life, nights spent fixing power lines in blizzards, my hands raw from cold, all to give him and Brianna a future. And now he'd turned on me, spitting on every sacrifice to claim her empire. Flores Consulting Solutions, a $35 million juggernaut of Denver offices, Wyoming ranches, and energy contracts. But I wasn't the broken man he thought I was. Not anymore. The hurt from yesterday was hardening into something else. Determination. I grabbed my old flannel coat, its cuffs frayed from years at the power plant, and headed out. Today, I'd take back control. The drive to Dan Morrison's law office was a blur, the Wyoming landscape a wash of sagebrush and distant snow-capped peaks under a gray November sky. My old Honda rattled along Route 191, the dashboard clock ticking past 8 a.m. I'd called Dan the night before, my voice shaking as I asked about Brianna's will, half expecting him to confirm Dustin's taunts. But his tone, calm with a hint of amusement, had stopped me cold. "Come to the office tomorrow, Jerry," he'd said, a sly chuckle in his voice. "It's not what you think." That chuckle stuck with me, a lifeline in the storm of betrayal. Now, pulling into the gravel lot outside Dan's Victorian office, its dark wood facade looming like a judge's bench, I felt a shift. The hurt from Dustin's words was still there, but it was fuel now, pushing me to act. I wasn't here to beg or plead. I was here to fight for what was right, to protect the legacy Brianna and I had built together, even if it meant facing my son head-on. Inside, the office smelled of leather and polished oak, its mahogany desk gleaming under a brass lamp's soft glow. An antique clock ticked on the bookshelf, its rhythm steady but ominous, like a countdown to judgment. Legal documents were stacked neatly on the desk, their edges crisp, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Dustin was already there, slouched in a high-backed chair, his tailored suit and sharp cologne screaming ambition. His Rolex caught the light from the tall windows, a stark contrast to my faded flannel and work-worn hands. He barely glanced at me, his lips curled in a smug half-smile, as if he'd already won. The $35 million company, its glass-walled Denver headquarters, its contracts with energy giants, its Wyoming land leased for millions, was his in his mind, and I was just a formality, a relic to be dismissed. But I sat down, my boots heavy on the hardwood, my heart pounding, but steady. They thought I was weak, but they were about to learn otherwise. Dan adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his face calm but authoritative, like a man who'd seen 1,000 family battles play out in this room. "We'll begin with the preliminary bequests of Brianna Flores's will," he said, opening a thick leather-bound folder, its pages rustling like whispers of truth. "To Dustin Flores, I bequeath the Hillcrest Avenue residence, valued at $800,000, and a cash sum of $500,000, to be disbursed upon the condition that all legal proceedings regarding the estate are uncontested." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. $500,000 and the house, a fortune by any measure, enough to buy a new life, a new start. The Hillcrest house, with its wraparound porch and stained-glass windows, was where Dustin had grown up, where I'd carried him on my shoulders, where I'd paid the mortgage through years of overtime. But his face twisted, his jaw tight, as if the bequest was an insult. "That's it?" he snapped, leaning forward, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What about the company? Mom would never sell Flores Consulting or give it to anyone else." His confidence was a blade, slicing through the room, but I caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the first crack in his armor. I stayed silent, my hands folded, my gaze fixed on Dan. Dustin's outburst was no surprise. It was the same arrogance he'd shown at the funeral, when he'd humiliated me before 200 mourners, calling me dead weight who'd held Brianna back. That moment had been the spark, the push that brought me here. I'd spent years swallowing his disrespect, but no more. Last night I'd called First Wyoming Bank, my voice steady as I asked about the old joint accounts Brianna and I had opened in the 90s. $200,000 in a savings account, meant for emergencies, still active under both our names. The banker, a gruff man named Carl who'd known me since my plant days, confirmed it was untouched, but someone had tried to access it 3 days ago. Dustin. My blood had run cold, but I'd kept my tone even, asking Carl to flag any withdrawal attempts. "Already done," he'd said. "Brianna called me last year, said to lock it tight unless you approved." That call had been my first move, a quiet step to protect what was mine, and now, sitting across from Dustin, I felt a surge of confidence. He thought he'd outsmarted me, but the game was just beginning. Dan raised a hand, his voice calm but firm, cutting through Dustin's bluster. "The company's disposition comes later," he said, his eyes flicking to me, a glint of something, reassurance maybe, that kept me grounded. "We're not done yet." Dustin leaned back, his arms crossed, but his smugness was unshaken, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of victory. "Good," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Because there's no way Mom would let him anywhere near it." He jerked his head toward me, not even bothering to say my name, as if I was beneath notice. The insult stung, but I swallowed it, my mind racing. I'd already taken my first steps, calling the bank, securing the $200,000, but I needed more. I needed to know what Brianna had planned, why Dan's chuckle had carried such weight. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low, but steady. "Let's hear it, Dan," I said, my words deliberate, a challenge wrapped in calm. Dustin's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing, but I didn't flinch. The man who'd worked 30 years at the power plant, who'd kept Rock Springs lit through storms, wasn't backing down now. The room's tension thickened, the antique clock's tick like a pulse in the silence. Dan flipped a page, his movements deliberate, but before he could continue, Dustin pulled out his phone, his fingers swift as he dialed. "It's me," he said, his voice loud enough to echo off the wood-paneled walls, putting the call on speaker with a smirk. "I'm at the will reading, and it's already a mess. They're giving me the house and some cash, but nothing about the company yet. I want you ready to file a challenge if this goes sideways. I know he influenced Mom secretly, probably when she was sick. He's trying to steal the will." The accusation hit like a punch, raw and vicious, the injustice of it burning through me. Influenced her? Stole the will? I hadn't spoken to Brianna in 15 years, not since our divorce, when she'd walked away with her dreams and I'd stayed behind, paying for Dustin's future. The lie was so brazen, so cruel, it left me momentarily speechless, my hands clenching the arms of the chair. He was using his money, his connections, to threaten a lawsuit, to paint me as a villain when I'd given him everything, $25,000 for his first apartment, $30,000 for his wedding, $20,000 for that Chevy truck he drove to Denver. The unfairness of it, the sheer immorality of his accusation, made my chest ache with a fury I hadn't felt in years. Dan's eyes narrowed, his patience thinning. "That's a serious claim, Dustin," he said, his voice sharp, like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Mrs. Flores was of sound mind when she finalized this will, with witnesses and a psychiatric evaluation to prove it. If you have evidence, you'll need to present it, but I'd caution you against false accusations." He held up a folder, thick with notarized documents, their seals glinting in the lamplight like badges of truth. "Any challenge will be met with the full weight of her legal directives." Dustin's lawyer, a slick man named Greg, who'd appeared at the funeral in a $2,000 suit, spoke through the phone, his voice cautious but eager. "We'll need to see the rest of the will, Dan. If there's anything irregular, we're prepared to act." Dustin nodded, his smirk returning as if he'd already won. "Do it," he said, his eyes locked on me, daring me to break. But I didn't. I sat taller, my voice steady when I spoke. "Go ahead, Dustin," I said, my words cold and deliberate. "Show your proof. Let's see it." The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, his smugness faltering. The accusation was a fresh wound, but it also clarified my purpose. His lies, his attempt to smear me as a manipulator, only fueled my resolve. I thought of the bank call, the $200,000 now safe, and the years I'd spent building a life for him, $60,000 for his MBA, $100,000 for the Hillcrest house, countless nights away from home to keep the lights on. He'd taken it all and now dared to call me a thief. But I wasn't the broken man he'd mocked at the funeral. I was taking control, piece by piece, and he didn't even know it. Dan's voice cut through the tension, his tone measured but firm. "There's a letter from Mrs. Flores to be read with the primary bequest," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from the folder, its edges crisp, Brianna's elegant handwriting visible through the paper. "It's to be read in the presence of both beneficiaries to clarify her intentions." My heart skipped, the words a spark of hope. A letter? From Brianna? I hadn't seen her handwriting in years, not since the notes she'd left on our kitchen table, planning her business while I worked the graveyard shift. Dustin's face tightened, his confidence wavering, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the envelope like it was a bomb. Dan's fingers broke the seal, the sound sharp in the quiet room, the clock's tick louder than ever. "We'll read the letter with the final bequest," he said, setting it aside, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. That glance, steady and knowing, sent a surge of certainty through me. Whatever was in that letter, it held the truth, and I was ready for it. Dustin's accusation, his threat of a lawsuit, was a desperate move, but I'd already taken my first steps, securing the $200,000, coming here, facing him down. The office's dark wood walls, the scattered papers, the faint scent of coffee from Dan's mug, all felt like a battlefield where I was finally standing my ground. I leaned back, my hands steady now, my voice low but firm in my mind. They think I'm done, I thought, the words a quiet vow. But this is only the start. Dustin's smirk, his lawyer's threats, couldn't touch me now. I was ready for the next move, for the truth to come out, for the moment when his world would shift. The will reading wasn't over, and something told me the real fight was just beginning. As Dan closed the folder, promising to resume tomorrow, I stood, my boots heavy, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. The Wyoming dusk was settling outside, the neon signs of Rock Springs diners flickering to life, their glow a reminder of simpler days. Brianna and I sharing pie, dreaming of a future that hadn't yet broken. Dustin grabbed his coat, his lawyer muttering about strategy, but I saw the crack in his facade, the first sign of fear. I'd called the bank, secured the $200,000, and now sat ready for Brianna's letter, whatever it held. The company, $35 million, a legacy of glass and steel, hung in the balance, and I was no longer the man Dustin had dismissed. I stepped into the cold, the stars sharp above, feeling a new strength. They thought I was weak, but they were about to see my fight. Tomorrow, the truth would come, and I was ready to claim what was mine. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The air in Dan Morrison's office was heavy with the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl, as if the walls themselves sensed the storm about to break. The antique clock on the bookshelf ticked relentlessly, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, my hands clenched in my lap, my work boots planted firmly on the hardwood floor of this polished Victorian office in Rock Springs, Wyoming. The mahogany desk gleamed under the soft glow of a brass lamp, its surface strewn with legal documents, their edges curling slightly as if burdened by the weight of the truth they held. Across from me, my son Dustin leaned forward, his Rolex catching the fading light through the tall arched windows, his face a volatile mix of smug confidence and creeping panic. He'd just heard he'd inherit the $800,000 Hillcrest Avenue house, a 3-story Victorian with oak-lined driveway and mountain views, and $500,000 in cash, a fortune by most measures. But it wasn't the prize he'd been banking on. The real treasure, Flores Consulting Solutions, valued at $35 million, with its sleek Denver offices, sprawling Wyoming real estate, and contracts with energy giants, hung in the balance. His betrayal at Brianna's funeral, where he'd sneered before 200 mourners, calling me a failure who'd get nothing from her $35 million will, still burned like a fresh wound. But Dan's sly chuckle from that day, that cryptic hint of a twist, kept me anchored, a spark of hope in the firestorm of his greed. The office itself was a study in old-money elegance, its dark wood paneling absorbing the last of the Wyoming dusk, the air thick with the scent of leather and polished oak. A framed map of Sweetwater County hung on the wall, its faded lines a reminder of the land I'd worked to keep powered through decades of blizzards and blackouts. My flannel-lined coat, worn thin from years at the power plant, felt out of place against the room's grandeur, but I sat tall, my resolve hardening. Dustin's polished suit and sharp cologne screamed ambition, but his eyes betrayed him, darting, uncertain, as if he sensed the ground shifting beneath him. The $500,000 and the house were substantial, but he'd expected the entire empire, the $35 million legacy his mother had built. His accusation at the funeral that I'd been dead weight holding Brianna back was a calculated move to paint me as unworthy, to secure his claim. Now, in this room, the truth was about to unravel his plans. Dan adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice steady but laced with authority, like a judge about to deliver a life-changing verdict. "We now move to the primary bequest," he said, turning a page in the thick, leather-bound file, its spine creased from years of handling. The clock's tick grew louder, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "To my former husband, Gerald Robert Flores, I leave the controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, valued at approximately $33.5 million, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and investment accounts associated with the business." The words struck like a thunderbolt, shattering the silence and sending a jolt through my entire body. $33.5 million. The company, Brianna's empire, the heart of everything that had fractured our family, was mine, not Dustin's. The number echoed in my mind, a staggering fortune that dwarfed my life's earnings from 30 years at the power plant, where I'd worked double shifts, my hands calloused from fixing lines in sub-zero cold. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, the weight of it sinking in. The Denver offices, with their glass walls and panoramic views of the Rockies, the Wyoming ranches leased to energy firms, the investment accounts funding scholarships for local kids, all of it was now my responsibility. My heart pounded, not with greed, but with the enormity of what Brianna had entrusted to me, a trust I hadn't felt since our early days, when we'd dreamed together on the Hillcrest porch, sipping lemonade under a Wyoming sunset. Dustin shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood, the sound like a scream in the quiet room. "This is fraud!" he roared, his face flushed red, veins bulging at his temples. "There's no way Mom would do this. She knew I was the one running things, not him." His finger jabbed toward me, his eyes wild with fury, a predator cornered. But I stayed still, my heart racing yet steady, a quiet strength rising within me. His outburst was the tantrum of a man who'd never learned to lose, a boy who'd grown up believing the world owed him everything. Dan raised a hand, his tone firm but unshaken. "Dustin, please sit down. There's more to read." But Dustin wasn't listening. "You did this, didn't you?" he snarled, his voice dripping with venom, his Rolex glinting as he leaned across the desk. "You got to her somehow, played the poor, pathetic ex-husband when she was sick?" The accusation was a knife, twisting deep, a vile lie that made my blood boil. Me? Manipulating Brianna? I hadn't spoken to her in 15 years, not since our divorce finalized in 2009, when we'd parted in a Denver courtroom, her eyes avoiding mine. The injustice of his words, accusing me of scheming to steal his inheritance, sparked a deep, righteous anger. He was rewriting our history again, just like at the funeral, painting me as a leech to justify his greed for the $33.5 million prize. This moment connected directly to the confrontation that had started in the chapel, where Dustin's public humiliation had pushed me to act. His words, "dead weight," he'd called me, had stung, but they'd also lit a fire. The day after the funeral, I'd sat in my apartment, the linoleum floor cold under my feet, digging through a shoebox of old bank statements. $50,000 for his college tuition, $60,000 for his MBA, $25,000 for his first apartment in Denver, $100,000 for the Hillcrest house down payment, receipts from overtime shifts, each one a testament to nights spent away from home, fixing power lines while Brianna built her empire and Dustin chased her dreams. I'd called Dan, my voice trembling, asking about the will, hoping for some shred of fairness. "Come to the reading," he'd said, that sly chuckle in his voice. "It's not what you think." Now, here in his office, that hope was crystallizing, and Dustin's plan to claim the empire was collapsing like a house of cards. His accusation of manipulation was a desperate swing, but it hit nothing but air. I met his gaze, my voice low but steady, the words cutting through the haze of his rage. "I didn't need to play anything, Dustin," I said, each syllable deliberate. "Your mother knew who I was." The room stilled, the weight of my words silencing his fury for a moment. His eyes narrowed, but I saw a flicker of doubt, a crack in his carefully constructed armor. Dan opened a sealed envelope, his movements slow and deliberate, pulling out a single sheet of paper covered in Brianna's elegant, looping handwriting, the ink slightly faded but unmistakable. Mrs. Flores left a letter to accompany the will, to be read aloud in the presence of both beneficiaries, he said, his voice heavy with the gravity of the moment. The clock's tick seemed to pause, the room's air growing denser. He began. To my son, Dustin, and my former husband, Jerry, I write this to explain my heart. Jerry, you were my rock for 22 years, the man who believed in me when I was just a girl with a dream in a small Wyoming town. Your sacrifices, working overtime at the power plant, supporting our family, paying for Dustin's education, our home, our life, gave me the foundation to build Flores Consulting. You gave up your own dreams, like that fishing cabin you wanted, to fund mine. Dustin, you've grown into a brilliant man, but your ambition blinds you. You see profit where I saw purpose. You're not ready to lead, not yet. Your focus on wealth over people would destroy what I built. I trust Jerry to carry my legacy, to ensure the company serves the values we once shared. Hard work, integrity, community. The words hung in the air like a gavel's strike, each one a dagger to Dustin's ego. My chest tightened, not with triumph, but with the bittersweet weight of Brianna's trust, a validation I hadn't felt since our early days, when we'd sit on the Hillcrest porch, the scent of sagebrush in the air, dreaming of a life together. Her words painted a vivid picture of our past. Me coming home at 3 a.m., coal dust on my hands, her sketching business plans on our old oak table, its surface scarred from Dustin's childhood drawings. Dustin's face twisted, his voice rising to a near scream, the kind that echoes in your bones. This is absurd. She was sick, wasn't she? You coerced her. He slammed his fist on the desk, sending papers fluttering like startled birds, a legal pad crashing to the floor with a dull thud. I've got files, you know, documents proving he harassed her after the divorce, letters he sent begging for money. The lie was a gut punch, so brazen it stole my breath. Harassed? Begged? The only letters I'd sent were birthday cards to Dustin, most returned unopened, their edges frayed from being shoved back through my mailbox in that beige apartment complex. The audacity of his deception, the sheer immorality of accusing me to steal what wasn't his, ignited a fury that made my hands tremble. My mind flashed to the sacrifices, $30,000 for his lavish wedding, complete with a live band and prime rib, $20,000 for his Chevy truck so he could drive to internships in Denver, nights spent in sub-zero cold, fixing power lines while he dined with clients in heated boardrooms. He'd taken everything I'd given, every dollar earned through sweat and sleepless nights, and now spat in my face, claiming I was the villain in his mother's story. But Dustin wasn't done. He yanked out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed, his voice sharp and frantic, like a man watching his empire slip away. "It's me," he barked, putting it on speaker so the room could hear, his desperation laid bare. "I'm at the will reading, and it's a complete setup. Jerry's here, and they're saying he gets the company. $33.5 million. I've got files, proof he harassed Mom, pressured her for years. Emails, voicemails. I've been building this case for years. I want to challenge this now. Undue influence, fraud, whatever it takes." His lawyer's voice crackled through, cautious but eager, a vulture sensing carrion. "We can file an emergency motion, but we'll need those files immediately." Dustin's eyes gleamed, a predator sensing blood, his confidence momentarily restored. "Oh, they're real? I've got them. Letters, recordings, everything." The lie was so vile it felt like a physical blow, the room spinning with the weight of his betrayal. Harassed her? I hadn't even known Brianna was sick until Dan's call, the one that came on a quiet Tuesday, my coffee going cold as I listened to the news of her passing. The injustice of his words, his willingness to slander me to claim the $33.5 million empire, was a betrayal deeper than the funeral, a wound that cut to my core, raw and bleeding. The office's dark wood walls seemed to close in, the scattered papers a testament to the chaos Dustin was trying to sow. My hands clenched into fists, the injustice choking me, memories flooding back like a Wyoming flash flood, $100,000 for the Hillcrest house down payment, a dream home where we'd planned to grow old, $60,000 for his MBA, money I'd earned through overtime shifts that left my back aching. Countless family vacations canceled because Brianna had a client meeting, leaving me to comfort a disappointed Dustin with promises of fishing trips we never took. His accusation wasn't just a lie, it was a betrayal of every sacrifice, every moment I'd poured into our family while he and Brianna chased ambition. The fury burned, but it also clarified my resolve. I wasn't the man he'd painted, the failure he'd mocked before 200 mourners. I was the man who'd kept the lights on, who'd loved them both through every hardship, and Brianna had seen that, even when they hadn't. Dan's expression hardened, his patience thinning like ice under a blowtorch. "Dustin, that's enough," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Flores underwent a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation in March 2024, and we have notarized statements from her doctor and 2 independent witnesses confirming her mental clarity. There's no record of any contact with Mr. Flores since their divorce in 2009. None. He held up a thick folder, its edges worn from handling, stuffed with legal certifications that gleamed like armor in the lamplight. "Your so-called files, if they exist, will be scrutinized in court, and I warn you, false claims carry serious consequences, including perjury." Dustin's lawyer, who'd slipped into the room mid-outburst, stood awkwardly by the door, his pinstripe suit rumpled, his briefcase clutched like a shield. His face paled as Dan spoke, his eyes darting to Dustin, who was unraveling before us. "I'll sue!" Dustin shouted, his voice breaking, sweat beading on his forehead, his Rolex glinting as he waved his hand wildly. "I've got proof he was a burden, a leech on her success." But Dan's calm was unshakable, his glasses catching the light as he leaned forward, his voice low but piercing. "Those files, if they're real, will be exposed as fraud. Brianna's letter, her will, and these documents are ironclad. You're wasting your time and risking your reputation." The room pulsed with the weight of his words, the ticking clock a relentless drumbeat marking Dustin's downfall. His plan, built on lies and fabricated evidence, was crumbling before my eyes, and I felt a quiet power rising within me. "They thought I was weak, but now they see the truth," I whispered to myself, the words a vow of victory carved in my heart. Dustin's face was a mask of panic, his earlier smugness replaced by raw fear as he realized the company, $33.5 million, the Denver offices with their marble floors, the contracts with energy giants, was slipping through his fingers like sand. The contrast was stark. His voice trembled, his accusations grew wilder, while I sat steady, the man Brianna had trusted to carry her legacy. The office's tall windows let in the last of the Wyoming dusk, casting long shadows across the scattered papers, a visual echo of Dustin's collapsing world. His lawyer scribbled notes, his face grim, whispering urgently in Dustin's ear. But it was too late. Brianna's letter had exposed his greed, her trust in me, a public rebuke, a slap he couldn't dodge. The folder of legal documents, psychiatric evaluations, notarized statements, sat on the desk like a fortress, impenetrable, a testament to her clarity and my innocence. Dan stacked the papers, his movements deliberate, his voice softening but firm, as if closing a chapter. "There's one more directive," he said, pulling out another document, its edges crisp and official, stamped with a notary's seal. "Mrs. Flores instructs that Flores Consulting Solutions remain focused on sustainable energy projects, as was her vision from the start. Jerry, she trusts you to oversee this to ensure the company serves the community, not personal gain." The words were a lifeline, a validation of the values I'd lived by: hard work, integrity, community. Values Dustin had mocked as small time at the funeral, his voice dripping with contempt as he tore me down before the crowd. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in years. The company wasn't just money. It was a responsibility, a chance to honor Brianna's dream and prove my worth. My mind flashed to her early days, working out of our garage, her notes scribbled on yellow legal pads, me bringing her coffee at midnight while Dustin slept upstairs. She'd built this empire, but I'd built the foundation, and now she'd entrusted me to protect it. Dustin slumped back into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, his lawyer muttering about appeals and options. But the fight was draining from him like air from a punctured tire. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched his phone, the screen still lit from his desperate call. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his voice was hollow, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by the panic of a man who'd bet everything and lost. I met his eyes, my tone even but firm, carrying a quiet power I hadn't felt in years. "Maybe it is, Dustin," I said, the words a promise that I wasn't the man he'd underestimated. The office, with its leather-bound books, polished desk, and scattered papers, felt like a courtroom where justice had been served. The ticking clock, the fading light through the windows, the faint hum of the heater, all bore witness to his downfall, a moment of reckoning that left him exposed. His lawyer trailed him as he grabbed his coat, his movements jerky, his face a mask of defeat. "We'll fight this," he hissed, but the words lacked conviction, and the door's click as they left was a final note in his unraveling. I stood, my work boots heavy on the hardwood, but my heart was light, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had lifted. The Wyoming dusk greeted me as I stepped outside, the cool air a balm after the heated battle, the neon signs of Rock Springs diners flickering to life along the quiet streets. Their glow reminded me of simpler nights, Brianna and I sharing cherry pie at the counter, her laugh warm as we planned a future that hadn't yet fractured. The victory wasn't just financial, it was personal, a reclaiming of my dignity after years of being dismissed. Brianna had seen me, the man who'd loved her through every sacrifice, $50,000 for Dustin's college, $60,000 for his MBA, $100,000 for the house, and chosen me to protect her legacy. The $33.5 million company was now my charge, a daunting but empowering responsibility. My apartment waited, its scarred kitchen table and faded photos a reminder of the life I'd lived for others. But now I felt a shift, a lightness, a sense of purpose, reborn. Dustin's lies, his fabricated files, had backfired, exposing his character to everyone in that room, and the injustice of his accusations, though still stinging, had fueled my resolve. As I walked to my car, the Wyoming stars emerged in a sky as vast as my new reality, their light sharp against the deepening blue. The $33.5 million bequest was staggering, but Brianna's letter lingered, her words a bridge to a past I thought I'd lost. The company, with its sprawling Denver offices, its contracts etched in decades of her ambition, was now mine to steer, a chance to honor her vision of community over profit. I could already see it, meetings with the staff, redirecting profits to scholarships, building on the foundation she'd left. Dustin's defeat was clear, his plan shattered by the truth, but the road ahead held more than victory. It held purpose, a chance to live the values I'd always held dear. I drove through Rock Springs, the neon diner signs casting pools of light on the pavement, my old Honda humming steadily. "They thought I was done," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. "But I'm just getting started." The night stretched out, vast and full of promise, and I was ready for whatever came next, a man no longer defined by betrayal, but by the strength I'd found within. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The office door clicked shut behind me as I stepped into the Wyoming dusk, the weight of Brianna's will still settling in my bones. The $33.5 million company, Flores Consulting Solutions, was mine, her legacy entrusted to me, not Dustin. The letter she'd left, her words praising my integrity over his ambition, had shattered his plans like glass under a hammer. His accusations, those fabricated files, claiming I'd harassed her, had collapsed under Dan's firm rebuttal, backed by legal proof of her sound mind. I drove home through Rock Springs' quiet streets, the neon glow of diners flickering against the twilight, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The victory wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen after all this time by the woman I'd loved for decades. But there was work to do, paperwork to finalize, decisions to make, and a part of me knew Dustin wouldn't let this go quietly. Still, I felt a calm certainty, a sense that I'd reclaimed something deeper than assets, my dignity. The next morning, I met Dan at his office again, the same mahogany desk now piled with transfer documents. The room smelled of old books and coffee, the antique clock ticking steadily as we worked through the legal details. "You'll need to sign here, Jerry," Dan said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. Each signature felt like a step forward, cementing my control over the company, $33.5 million in assets, from Denver office spaces to investment accounts funding community projects Brianna had championed. The process was straightforward. Brianna's will was airtight, her psychiatric evaluations and notarized statements blocking any challenge Dustin might dream up. His lawyer had slunk out of the reading, briefcase in hand, muttering about reviewing options, but Dan assured me the case was closed. "He's got no ground to stand on," he said, his glasses glinting under the lamp. I nodded, signing the final page, feeling the weight of betrayal lift just a little more with each stroke of the pen. Back at my apartment, I sat in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming softly, its ice dispenser a faint echo of our old family home. The linoleum floor gleamed from a fresh mop, and the morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the photo of Brianna on the mantel, her red coat vivid, her smile warm. "I finally feel free," I whispered to her, the words a quiet release. The hurt from Dustin's betrayal, the sting of his lies at the funeral and in that office, began to fade. I wasn't just a retired power plant worker anymore. I was the steward of Brianna's legacy, tasked with preserving her values, hard work, community, integrity. I started visiting the company's main office in Denver, a sleek building with glass walls and views of the Rockies. Meeting the staff, I shared my vision, keeping the firm focused on sustainable energy projects like Brianna always wanted, not the profit-driven deals Dustin had pushed for. The employees, many of whom remembered Brianna's early days, nodded in approval, their trust a balm to my soul. Dustin, meanwhile, was unraveling. A week after the reading, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd moved into a rented condo in Cheyenne, a far cry from the $800,000 Hillcrest Avenue house he'd inherited. The $500,000 bequest was substantial, but it wasn't the empire he'd expected, and word was he'd burned through much of it already. Legal fees for his failed challenge, flashy purchases to keep up appearances. He'd been let go from Flores Consulting after failing to meet the will's employment condition, his colleagues distancing themselves after his outburst at the reading. The contrast was stark. While I walked the company halls, shaking hands with engineers and accountants, Dustin was alone, his social circle shrinking as his reputation took a hit. Rock Springs was a small town, gossip traveled fast, and his lies about me had turned old friends against him. One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad, it's me." Dustin's voice came through, softer than I'd ever heard it. I'm sorry. I got carried away. Can we talk?" I stood by my kitchen window, watching the Wyoming stars emerge, my heart torn but resolute. His apology sounded rehearsed, a last-ditch effort to claw back influence. "Dustin," I said, my voice steady, "you made your choices. I've made mine." I hung up, setting a boundary I'd never had the strength to draw before. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was liberating. I didn't need his regret to move forward. I had myself, my values, and Brianna's trust. That was enough. Walking through City Park the next day, the lake reflecting the clear autumn sky, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before the divorce. The park's benches, lined with families and retirees feeding ducks, reminded me of simpler times. Picnics with Dustin when he was small, Brianna laughing as we tossed a frisbee. The $35 million total estate, $33.5 million to me, $500,000, and the house to Dustin, was more than money. It was a testament to Brianna's belief in me. I'd already begun redirecting company profits to local scholarships, something Brianna had done quietly for years. The act felt right, like honoring her memory while building something new. My apartment, with its scarred kitchen table and faded photos, no longer felt like a cage, but a starting point for a life I could shape. Dustin's downfall was complete when I heard he'd taken a job at a smaller firm in Denver, a step down from the executive suite he'd imagined. His condo, a modest $2,500 a month rental, was a far cry from the Hillcrest Mansion's oak-lined driveway and mountain views. Friends told me he'd tried to spin the story, claiming he'd chosen simplicity, but the truth was clear. His greed had isolated him. The contrast between us was undeniable. I was finding purpose, while he scrambled to rebuild. His call lingered in my mind, but I didn't waver. "I don't need them anymore," I said to myself, standing by the park's lake, the water rippling gently. "I have my own path now." The words carried a quiet power, a declaration of independence after years of being dismissed. Reflecting on it all, I realized the lesson Brianna's will had taught me. Character matters more than money. Real family respects you not for what you can give, but for who you are. I'd spent decades supporting Dustin and Brianna, working double shifts to pay for his education, her dreams. Their betrayal had hurt, but it had also freed me to see my own worth. Self-respect, I learned, was the truest wealth. No one could take that away. The company, with its $33.5 million in assets, was a responsibility I embraced, not for profit, but for the chance to do good. I started meeting with community leaders, planning to expand Brianna's scholarship fund, ensuring kids in Rock Springs had the opportunities Dustin had squandered. As I walked home from the park, the Wyoming wind cool against my face, I felt a sense of completion. The apartment's familiar creaks greeted me as I stepped inside, the photo of Brianna on the mantel, now a reminder of love, not loss. I was no longer the man Dustin had mocked at the funeral, nor the one who'd felt small in Brianna's shadow. I was Jerry Flores, a man who'd stood up, reclaimed his place, and found peace in doing what was right. The hurt of betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet strength that grew with each step I took toward a new life. One afternoon, as I sorted through company papers, I found a flyer for a local charity group, one Brianna had supported years ago. It was for a community center in Rock Springs, offering classes for retirees and kids alike, art, woodworking, even financial literacy. I smiled, tucking the flyer into my pocket. Maybe I'd stop by, meet some folks, maybe even teach a class on fixing electrical grids, something I knew inside out from my plant days. The idea felt like a spark, a small but bright possibility for the future. It wasn't about starting over, it was about building on the foundation I'd always had, my values, my work ethic, my heart. As I looked out my window at the fading sunset, the horizon stretching wide and open, I knew I was ready for whatever came next, free from the shadows of betrayal. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. A few months after the will reading, I stood on the porch of my new beach house in St. Augustine, Florida, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and freedom. The house, a modest $800,000 bungalow with white shutters and a wraparound deck, was a far cry from my old apartment in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Its hardwood floors gleamed under the morning sun, and the view of the Atlantic stretched endlessly before me, waves lapping gently against the shore. I'd sold my apartment and moved here with a portion of the $33.5 million inheritance, a decision that felt right after years of living small to support Brianna and Dustin. The company, Flores Consulting Solutions, was thriving under my oversight, its focus on sustainable energy projects, honoring Brianna's vision. I'd hired a team of advisors to handle the day-to-day, but I made the big calls, ensuring every contract reflected the values of integrity and community she'd trusted me to uphold. Each morning, as I sipped coffee on the deck, watching seagulls soar over the dunes, I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. Every day I wake up knowing I chose right, I said to myself, the words a quiet affirmation of the life I was building. Back in Wyoming, Dustin's life had taken a different turn. I heard through a former neighbor that he'd settled into a $1,200 a month in Cheyenne, a one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of a parking lot, not the Hillcrest Avenue mansion with its oak-lined driveway and mountain vistas. The $500,000 he'd inherited was dwindling, spent on legal fees from his failed attempt to challenge the will and a flashy sports car he couldn't quite afford to maintain. He'd landed a job at a mid-tier consulting firm in Denver, a step down from the executive role he'd dreamed of at Flores Consulting. The gossip in Rock Springs painted a clear picture. His outburst at the will reading and his baseless accusations against me had cost him friends and respect. He'd tried to spin it, telling people he'd chosen a simpler life, but the truth was he'd isolated himself with his greed. The contrast was stark. While I walked the beach each morning, feeling the sand under my feet, he was scrambling to rebuild a life that no longer glittered. One afternoon, as I sorted through mail in my new kitchen, a letter arrived that caught me off guard. The envelope was cream-colored, postmarked from Denver, with handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note from Margaret, one of Brianna's oldest friends, a woman I hadn't seen since our early married days. "Jerry," it began, "I found this among Brianna's things after she passed. She spoke of you often, even after the divorce, always with love. She said you were the heart of her success, the one who gave her the courage to dream big. I thought you should know." Enclosed was a photo from 1987, Brianna and me at a backyard barbecue, laughing, my arm around her as she held a sparkler. The memory hit like a wave, warm and bittersweet. It confirmed what her will had shown. She'd never stopped valuing me, even when ambition pulled us apart. The letter deepened the lesson I'd learned. True wealth lies in character, in the love you give and receive, not in bank accounts. Standing by the kitchen window, the ocean sparkling beyond, I felt a surge of gratitude. The bungalow's open layout, with its driftwood coffee table and seashell decor, was a fresh start, a place where I could be myself without the weight of betrayal. I'd started volunteering at a local community center, teaching a weekly class on basic electrical work, skills I'd honed at the power plant. The retirees and young folks in my class reminded me of the community I'd served for decades, their eager questions a balm to the loneliness of those years after the divorce. "You're a natural, Jerry," one student said, grinning as he wired a circuit correctly. Their respect, earned through shared effort, was worth more than any fortune. Dustin tried reaching out again, this time through a text message that arrived one evening as I sat on the deck, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. "Dad, I've changed. Can we meet? I want to make things right." The words stirred a flicker of old pain, but I didn't respond. I'd forgiven him in my heart, not for him, but for me, to let go of the anger that had once consumed me. But forgiveness didn't mean reopening the door. "I don't need his apologies," I murmured, watching the waves roll in. "I have my life now." I deleted the message, my fingers steady, my heart at peace. The boundary was set, a line drawn in the sand as clear as the shoreline before me. Dustin had his path, and I had mine, one built on self-respect and the values I'd always held. The Florida mornings were my favorite, walking miles along the beach, the sand cool under my bare feet, the sunrise a daily promise of new beginnings. The bungalow's deck became my sanctuary, where I'd sit with a mug of black coffee, listening to the gulls and reflecting on the journey. The $33.5 million company was a responsibility I carried with pride, its profits funding scholarships for kids in Wyoming and Florida, a legacy Brianna would have loved. The $800,000 house, with its ocean view and creaky porch swing, was more than a home. It was a symbol of my independence, a place where I could live true to myself. I'd hung the barbecue photo from Margaret on the living room wall, next to a faded picture of Dustin as a boy, a reminder of love without regret. The community center became a second home, its bustling halls filled with laughter and purpose. I'd joined a woodworking group, carving simple birdhouses alongside retirees who shared stories of their own triumphs and losses. One day, as I sanded a cedar plank, a woman named Clara, with kind eyes and a quick laugh, handed me a flyer for a charity gala. "You should come, Jerry," she said. "It's for the Kids Scholarship Fund. You'd fit right in." The idea sparked something, a chance to connect, to build something beyond myself. It wasn't about replacing the family I'd lost, but about finding a new one, rooted in shared values. As I stood on the beach one evening, the tide pulling back to reveal shells scattered like treasures, I thought about Dustin. Word was he'd started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of his choices. Maybe he'd learned, late as it was, that ambition without integrity leads nowhere. But that was his story now, not mine. The contrast was clear. While he pieced together a fractured life in his Cheyenne rental, I was whole, surrounded by a community that valued me for who I was. The ocean stretched before me, vast and unyielding, a mirror of the strength I'd found. My final reflection came as I sat on the porch swing, the creak of the chains a soothing rhythm. "True wealth is in character and the people who truly care," I said softly, the words a quiet truth etched into my soul. The betrayal, Dustin's lies, his greed, had hurt, but it had also shown me my worth. I'd spent years giving everything to my family, only to be cast aside. Now I lived for myself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. The company, the beach house, the community center, they were pieces of a life I'd built on my terms. Brianna's letter, Margaret's note, the photo of that long-ago barbecue, they all reminded me that love and integrity endure, even when family fails. I tucked the charity gala flyer into my pocket, a small step toward the future. Maybe I'd go, meet new faces, share a laugh under the Florida stars. The past was settled, the boundaries firm. Dustin was a shadow, fading with each sunrise. As the waves crashed gently, I felt complete, a man who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger, living true to the values that had always defined me. The horizon glowed with possibility, and I was ready to meet it, one day at a time. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.